special time and place for them. Now you know the rest of the story. You have the fall. And when we have the fall of mankind and sin comes into the world, it was not because of human sexuality. So many people say, well, you know, that apple on the tree and that all represents something that has to do with sex, and absolutely it does not. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so what Satan tempted them to do basically was to not believe that what God had told them was true. Eve, are you sure that God said? Are you sure that you can trust God? Did God say? And ever since then, all of these wonderful and powerful and loving gifts that God has given us, the enemy has constantly tried to come in and try to distort and to destroy what God has made. If you look in verses 23 through 25, you see Adam's response in Hebrew has exclamation marks all over it. This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She should be called woman because she was taken out of man. Now, when he realizes that he has this helpmate, we have this instruction that immediately follows this. It doesn't say, now, you guys just shack up until you get to know each other. It doesn't say anything of that sort. It immediately moves to talk about God instituting marriage. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. That word join is a word that talks about covenant, about things being put together in an undissolvable kind of relationship. How do you understand that to be? They shall become one flesh. Now, physically, there's just one of me up here. But Liz is back there. And as we have gone through life, we've gotten to the place where we pretty much know what the other one's thinking, and it can truly be aggravating, you know? I know what you're thinking over there, right? Oh, don't you? I see that look on your face. But you get to the place where it's not just a physical thing, it's not just a mental thing, there's a spiritual thing that begins to happen that God has intended that makes a part of that. And notice, if you would, the innocence of it. What is left in our culture that has anything to do with human sexuality that has even an inkling of innocence to it? And yet they were naked and were not ashamed. There was nothing to be ashamed of. There was no sin in the world. There were no things that they should be ashamed of. This was God's perfect plan. It was his purpose. And sin wrecks this situation. So you and I, as followers of God, as children of God, as disciples of Christ, as Christian people, should be the best illustration on the planet of people who are trying to understand human sexuality from God's perspective and to get this right. And yet, in our world today, there's so much that goes on that Christians just fall into as well. If you were to read Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, you would see all of these passages, all the times that God says, now, don't be looking on the nakedness of, and he starts going through a list, because the people, by the time of the law, they've gone so far away from the things of God that God is having to say, you know, don't demean your father by looking on his nakedness. We had a situation where that happened in Scripture, did we not? Noah and his sons. How did God feel about the fact that that had happened? Well, Noah's son was cursed because of what he had done. And so he was ridiculing, making fun of his dad in that situation. But then it goes on, most of the time we talk about looking on the nakedness of another person with a sexual kind of intent. It's a code word. Not to look on their nakedness is talking about human sexuality, and it prohibits all forms of incest and all of these kinds of things in these passages. Well, when Satan caused Eve to question. And when sin came into the world, the marriage covenant was not resolved. But everything became much more difficult. If people are not prepared to trust God, and God is perfect, and God is holy, and God is entirely loving, how well are we going to learn to trust each other? And to have the kinds of expectations that what God is doing in our relationship is for our blessing and for our good, rather than something that we have to battle for and wrestle for and try to take hold of and basically try to pull out of each other. See, God's plan did not change after the fall. This is the nature of marriage, is that God is still building one flesh relationship. It happens in marriage because he loves us, and yet we have gone away from what God intended in marriage. And every time we have a departure from God's plan, it is referred to in some way an abomination, a perversion, a sin, whatever you want to call it. God is saying that you're ruining and allowing the enemy to ruin your life what I have intended for your good. So if you're sexually involved with someone outside the context of marriage, it's fornication. If you're involved in various kinds of sexual sins, sexual immorality. If you're involved with someone who is not your spouse, a married person, it is adultery. And so the Bible is clear that God's holy and perfect plan was the best thing for us, and any departure from that is not acceptable. In Deuteronomy 22, we see how intent God was that in relationships that young adults, teenagers, people who are going to be marrying, maintain their virginity until marriage. It was actually in their law to actually have a display of the proof that this young lady was a virgin in her marriage. And if someone accused his wife of having not been a virgin, and it was a false accusation, there was a penalty for that as well. As you continue on and look at verse 17, behold, he has charged her with shameful deeds, saying, "I did not find your daughter a virgin," saying to the dad. "But this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. They shall spread the garment to show that. So the elders of the city shall take the man and chastise him." Now, how would you like to be chastised by the city? You know, this virginity issue was very, very important from the very beginning, when they were naked and not ashamed. As it goes on, there's chastising, there's a fine, there is the recognition of the fact that he has publicly defamed a virgin of Israel. As you consider these things, then he then has to keep her as a wife. He cannot divorce her all her days. Some of you ladies can look at that passage and say, "I don't want to be married to that guy." But you weren't living in that day and time either. See, the fact of the matter is that relationship was maintained for her good, for her protection, for her dignity, in a society where women were basically considered and treated more often than not as property. So God is bringing about a change in the situation for the protection of women. Now you say, okay, give me a story then that would be someone explaining anything about this kind of idea. How many of you remember a story? It's called the Christmas Story. Joseph finds out that Mary is pregnant. And so what's he going to do? He knows he's not responsible. Somebody has to be. And so he's going to put her away quietly. He doesn't want to make it worse than it is. Why? Because in God's land, with God's people, virginity and maintaining purity are crucial and important factors, whether you're not married yet or after you marry, that you protect the sanctity of that marriage. These things matter to God. And when we as a people go away from those things, we suffer all justification anywhere in Scripture for two men being married, for two women being married. In fact, those people would have been stoned to death in the Old Testament had they been discovered. There are no biblical permissions for anyone based on the idea that they were created differently. God didn't say to the Jewish people, now there are some folks among your midst who are just not going to be able to stop doing this, and so you have to make a special account for them. There's no statement in there that says, well, they love each other, and because they love each other, then it makes it okay. It's just not there. It's not there in the Old Testament. It's not there in the New Testament because God has a specific, loving, caring purpose for marriage and for human sexuality. It is all tied together. So now what do we do with all kinds of aberrant sexual behaviors that are around us constantly? We have to be real careful with that. Because sometimes we push people away who could come to an understanding of what God wants for their life by labeling them and by saying that they're all bad, horrible, and boy, get rid of them. When in fact, some people have never even been presented the truth. They've never heard about the love of God. They don't understand God's love and purpose for them, and so they go off into other things just trying to feel like somebody in this world cares about me and loves me. Until they have an opportunity to know the God who loves them, to understand that Christ loves them, then we're not going to accomplish a good purpose by ridiculing them and abusing them. So we have to be careful to act as Jesus would act in this situation. Well, our culture now is accepting pornography, nudity in films and television, prostitution. We're having to deal with our children on sexting with their cell phones, sending pictures, nude pictures to each other, and having perverse conversations on their phones. How far away are we from what God has planned and intended? Well, a lot of people, when I mention especially things like movies and magazines and materials, they say, preachers, they're all prudes. They just, stuff shirts. They don't get it. That stuff really doesn't matter. It's all just kind of fun. It's just something, whatever. That's just the way things are. And yet someday we're going to stand before God. And I just have this feeling in my gut that I'm not going to want to stand before God and say, God, that's just the way it was. We have to reel ourselves back in to understand that we are beings that are going to exist somewhere for all eternity, either with God or away from Him in torment, and the things that we do matter now. Amen. They matter. Now, for many of us, the subject of human sexuality is a grievous thing because there may be struggles in your life with temptations or with things just not going the way you hoped in a marriage situation. I don't know any of those things. But I can tell you this. If you have physiology that works, it is God's desire and plan to give you the mentality to make it happen. He is committed to your marriage relationship. There are times when physiology is an issue. But most of the time, people miss the point that most of human sexuality is mental. You see, if people can choose to have all kinds of desires for things that are away from God's purpose, because mentally in their mind, they come to the place that they focus their desires on those people or those things. It is mostly a mental process. And what happens is when we have expectations of each other where we do not realize that this other person who